His skin was deathly pale. He was not a hiker, he was out hunting for fresh human resources. That was the thought that would haunt Mark years later, a realization that arrived far too late to do him any good. But in the moment, standing on the sun-drenched, overcrowded trail of the Appalachian Ridge, Mark only saw an anomaly. The man stood just off the main path, perfectly still, untouched by the sweat and grime that coated everyone else. He wore high-end gear that looked as if it had been pulled off a mannequin 5 minutes ago. Crisp, unstained, and creaseless. Mark adjusted the straps of his heavy Osprey pack, wiping stinging sweat from his eyes. He was an experienced trekker, a man who sought the wilderness for silence, not for the carnival atmosphere that the peak season had brought to this section of the woods. He had been walking for 3 days, and for 3 days he had been surrounded by loud college students, families with barking dogs, and Bluetooth speakers blasting pop music. He was desperate for isolation. "You look like you researching for something you have not found yet," the pale man said. His voice was smooth, lacking the breathless rasp of someone who had just climbed 2,000 feet. Mark stopped, startled. He had not intended to engage, but the man's positioning was deliberate, blocking the natural flow of the break area. "Just looking for a quiet spot to camp," Mark grunted, shifting his weight. "Trail SA highway today." "It always is," the man smiled. It was a practiced smile, tight and showing too many teeth. "That's why I do not use the map routes. The maps are for the tourists. The real beauty is hidden." Mark looked the stranger up and down. The man's skin was the color of curdled milk, translucent enough to show a map of blue veins beneath the surface. He did not look like he belonged in the sunlight. He looked like something that lived in a climate-controlled boardroom. "I stick to the marked trails," Mark said, moving to step around him. "Safety first." "Safety is an illusion in numbers," the man countered, his voice dropping an octave, becoming almost conspiratorial. "Their SA Ridge, 2 miles east. The Devil's Pulpit, the locals used to call it. It's not on the outcome maps because the park rangers do not want to maintain it. But the view changes you, and silence, absolute silence." Mark hesitated. The promise of silence was a hook that snagged deep in his chest. He looked back down the main trail, where a group of teenagers was shouting over a cooler of beer. Then he looked at the man, whose eyes were fixated on Mark with an intensity that felt predatory, though Mark read it as mere eccentricity. "Where is it?" Mark asked, against his better judgment. "See that split by the lightning-struck oak?" The man pointed a pale, manicured finger toward a dense thicket of rhododendrons. "Push through the brush. Their SA game trail. Follow it for an hour. Do not deviate. It looks rough, but it opens up. Trust me, you will not see another soul." "And you just came from there?" Mark asked, skeptical of the man's pristine appearance. "I spent the morning there," the man said, lying with the ease of a sociopath. "It was spiritual." Mark looked at the sun. He had about 4 hours of light left. 2 miles was nothing. He could get there, set up camp, and finally breathe. The logic of his desire overpowered the lizard brain warning signaling that something was wrong with this man's face. Something wrong with the way he did not blink enough. "Thanks for the tip," Mark said. "Do not thank me," the man replied, stepping aside. "Just enjoy the view. SA once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." Mark pushed past him. As he entered the brush near the oak tree, the air grew instantly cooler. He fought through the initial barrier of leaves and found the faint path the man had promised. It was narrow, barely a deer run, winding down into a darker, denser part of the forest. He walked for 10 minutes, the sounds of the main trail fading until they were swallowed by the trees. Finally, he had his silence. But as the canopy thickened and the light turned a bruised purple, the silence shifted from peaceful to oppressive. There were no birds here, no squirrels chittering, just the sound of his own boots crushing dry, brittle twigs. He stopped to check his GPS, but the signal was dead. A heavy, irrational dread settled in his stomach. He turned around, considering heading back, admitting defeat. That was when he saw the marker. A small strip of red fabric tied to a branch, just as a trail marker would be. It reassured him. Someone had been here. It was not wild wilderness. It was a path. He turned back around, committed to the choice he had made, and took a confident step forward onto a patch of flat, leaf-covered ground. The world did not shift. It vanished. One moment, Mark was calculating the remaining daylight. The next, gravity took hold with a violent jerk. The ground beneath his right boot was not earth at all. It was a fragile crust of twigs and leaves suspended over a void. He did not even have time to scream. The drop was sudden and absolute. He fell 10 feet, plunging into the damp darkness of the earth. His body slammed against the dirt walls, but the impact with the bottom was what shattered his reality. He did not land flat. He landed on something hard, vertical, and unforgiving. A sound tore through the forest. A wet, crunching snap followed by a howl that sounded more animal than human. It was his own voice. Mark lay at the bottom of the pit, his vision swimming in bursts of white and red. For a moment, his brain refused to process the sensory input. He tried to push himself up, but his right arm was pinned. He looked down, and the scream died in his throat, replaced by a cold, vibrating shock. A wooden stake, thick as a baseball bat and whittled to a crude, jagged point, had driven itself through his forearm. It had entered just below the wrist and punched through the muscle and skin, exiting near the elbow. The wood was dark, stained with older, dried fluids, and now slick with his fresh, bright crimson blood. "Oh God! Oh God! Oh God!" Mark gibbered, his breath coming in shallow, hyperventilating gasps. The pain had not fully registered yet. The shock was acting as a buffer, but he could feel the pressure, the intrusion of a foreign object violating his body. He looked up. The opening of the pit was a square of light high above him. The edges were perfectly cut. This was not a sinkhole. It was not an eroded gully. The walls were spade-dug, vertical and smooth. The floor was lined with tarp. And the stake was centered. It was a tiger trap. The realization hit him harder than the fall. He was not the victim of a hiking accident. He was prey. The pale man. The secret trail. The specific instructions. It had all been a funnel, guiding him to this exact square meter of earth. The pain arrived then, a roaring, searing fire that traveled up his shoulder and exploded in his skull. Mark grit his teeth so hard he felt a molar crack. He had to get out. He had to move. He reached with his good left hand to the stake, his fingers trembling uncontrollably. If he could just pull it out. He tugged, and the world dissolved into white agony. The stake was buried deep in the ground. He was anchored to the floor of the pit like a pinned butterfly. "Help!" he screamed, the sound raw and tearing at his throat. "Somebody help me!" But he knew, deep down, in the cold clarity of his adrenaline, he knew that the only person who would hear him was the monster who had sent him here. The silence of the forest, which he had coveted so much, was now his cage. Mark scrambled with his legs, kicking at the dirt walls, trying to find purchase, trying to leverage himself up, but the stake held him fast. He was trapped. He looked at his arm again. The fingers were already turning a dusky blue. The blood was pooling on the tarp beneath him, smelling of iron and terror. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Casual, rhythmic footsteps crunching on the dead leaves above. They were not hurried. They were the steps of someone checking a snare line. Mark froze. He looked up at the square of light, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. A shadow fell across the opening. It was not the pale man. It was a silhouette, blocked by the sun, but the shape was wrong, too bulky, wearing something that looked like a hazmat suit or heavy protective gear. "I'm hurt!" Mark yelled, desperation overriding his fear. "Get me out! I'm impaled!" The figure did not speak. It did not offer a rope. It simply stood there, observing. The lack of empathy was more terrifying than any weapon. Then the light began to disappear. The figure dragged a heavy plywood cover over the hole. Darkness rushed in, suffocating and absolute, leaving only thin slivers of sunlight cutting through the cracks. No, no, wait. Mark hammered his good fist against the dirt wall. Do not leave me. A small metallic clatter echoed in the pit. Something had been dropped through a gap in the plywood. It landed near Mark's boots with a hollow tink. Then came the hiss. A white plume of gas erupted from the canister, smelling sweet and chemical, like rotting almonds and ether. Mark tried to hold his breath, tried to pull his shirt over his nose with his one good hand, but the gas filled the confined space instantly. His lungs burned, his vision blurred. The pain in his arm began to drift away, replaced by a heavy, terrifying numbness. He slumped back against the dirt, his consciousness unraveling. The last thing he thought of was the pale man's smile, and the horrific realization that the man had not been a hiker. He was a procurement officer. Mark woke to the vibration of the road and the smell of antiseptic masking the stench of stale sweat. He was not in a hospital. The suspension was too stiff, the engine too loud. He was lying on a metal surface, cold against his back. He tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids felt like lead. He managed to crack them open a fraction. The interior was dim, lit by a single flickering LED strip. He was in the back of a cargo van. There were no windows. He tried to move his right arm, and a fresh wave of nausea rolled over him. He could not move it. He looked down, his vision swimming. A woman was bent over his arm. She was wearing a plastic apron stained with dark smears. She was not a doctor. She held a curved upholstery needle and thick, black thread. She was driving the needle through his torn flesh with the brutal efficiency of someone stitching a canvas sack. Mark gasped, a choked, gurgling sound. The pain was dull but deep, blocked partially by whatever drugs they had gassed him with. But the sensation of the thread pulling through his skin was distinct and horrifying. The woman did not stop. She did not look at his face. She pulled the thread tight, closing the jagged hole where the stake had been. "He is awake," she said. Her voice was flat, bored. "Give him another dose?" A man's voice called from the driver's seat. It was not the pale man. It was a rougher, deeper voice. "No point," the woman muttered, tying off a knot and biting the thread with her teeth. She wiped the wound with a rag soaked in something that stung like fire. "Do not waste the ketamine." Mark tried to speak, his tongue feeling like a dry sponge. Who are you?" The woman ignored him. She picked up his arm, twisting it to inspect the underside. Mark screamed, a weak, pathetic sound. The arm was a ruin. The bone was obviously shattered, the muscle torn to ribbons. It was swollen to twice its size, purple and black. "Well?" the driver asked, glancing back through the partition. "Is it salvageable?" The woman dropped Mark's arm onto the metal floor with a thud. Mark whimpered, tears leaking from his eyes. "Negative," she said, stripping off her bloody gloves. "The structure is compromised. The bone shattered into the nerve cluster. Infection is already setting in. Look at the necrosis." "Damn it!" The driver slammed his hand on the steering wheel. Derek said he was a prime cut. Athletic male, early 30s, no history of disease. "Derek is a salesman." The woman spat, opening a cooler and taking out a bottle of water for herself. "He does not check the merchandise after he traps it. He just sends the coordinates." Mark listened, his mind reeling in horror. Merchandise. They were not kidnappers holding him for ransom. They were not sadists torturing for fun. They were logistics. "So what? We see not sell him?" the driver asked. "Not to the clients we have lined up," the woman said, looking at Mark with a look of pure annoyance. "The liver is fine, kidneys are good. But the buyers for the organs are lowballing right now. The big money was in the labor auction. A healthy, strong male for the extraction camps. But with that arm, he is useless. He see not work. He is a liability. By the time we treat the infection and fix the bone, the cost outweighs the profit." "We could strip him for parts now," the driver suggested casually. "Too messy." "We re 3 hours from the chop shop," the woman replied. "And I'm not doing a field harvest in a moving van. I'm tired, and we have a pickup in Ohio tomorrow. Mark lay there, paralyzed not by the drugs, but by the sheer industrial coldness of their conversation. He was a product that had been damaged in shipping. He was a box of fruit that had been dropped and bruised, and now the grocers were deciding whether to discount him or throw him in the dumpster. So he essay write-off? The driver asked. Complete write-off, the woman sighed. Mark him as damaged in transit. Derek will have to eat the loss on his commission. What do we do with him? The woman looked down at Mark. Her eyes met his. There was no pity there, only calculation. She saw him awake, listening, understanding. He has seen our faces, she noted. Barely, the driver said. He is high as a kite. Pull over at the next exit, she said, turning away. Find a ditch. Let nature sort it out. The sensation of gravel biting into his cheek woke him again. It was night. The air was cold, smelling of diesel and wet grass. Mark was lying on the side of a road, hidden by tall weeds. His body felt broken, every inch of him screaming in protest. He tried to push himself up, but his right arm was a dead weight, a throbbing mass of agony wrapped in crude bandages. He heard the van idling a few yards away. The back doors slammed shut. You lucky, honey? The woman's voice drifted through the darkness. She was standing over him, silhouetted against the headlights. If you had not fallen so hard, if you had not smashed that arm so thoroughly, you would be waking up in a shipping container heading across the Atlantic right now. You'd be digging mines until you died. She kicked a layer of dirt over his legs, not to bury him, but to hide the white of his shoes from passing cars. Consider this a clearance sale, she whispered. The van doors locked. The engine revved. Tires spun on the gravel, spraying him with stones, and then the taillights receded into the distance, leaving him in the suffocating dark. Mark lay there for what felt like hours. He drifted in and out of consciousness. He hallucinated the pale man's face in the moon. He saw the smile, hunting for fresh resources. The pain was the only thing that kept him tethered to the earth. He forced himself to roll over. He had to move. If he stayed here, he would die of exposure or shock. He crawled. He dragged his useless, ruined arm through the mud, sobbing with every inch. He crawled toward the sound of distant tires on pavement. Took him an eternity to reach the asphalt. He lay his head on the white line, the vibration of the road buzzing against his skull. Light flooded his vision. Screeching brakes. Car door opening. Voices. Normal voices. Terrified human voices. Oh my God. Call 911. Yes, bleeding out. Hands touched him, gentle, shaking hands. Not the cold latex of the seamstress. Mark tried to speak, but all that came out was a dry croak. He looked up at the stars, spinning above him. The recovery took months. The police report was filed, but it was a dead end. The location Mark described, the secret trail, the pit, was never found. The forest was too vast, and the rain had washed away the tracks. The van was a ghost. The license plates Mark half remembered belonged to a car scrapped 5 years ago. Mark sat in the sterile light of his kitchen, 13 years later. He looked down at his right arm. It was a withered, scarred thing. The range of motion was almost non-existent. The nerve damage was permanent. His hand was a claw he could barely open. He could not hike anymore. He could not lift anything heavy. He lived with chronic pain that spiked when the weather turned cold. He was broken, but he was alive. He took a sip of his coffee, his left hand trembling slightly. He often thought about the woman's parting words. You're lucky. It was a twisted, sick kind of luck. He had been saved by his own fragility. If the stake had missed the bone, if it had just been a flesh wound, he would have been valuable. He would have been grade A stock. He would have been sold, shipped, and enslaved. His failure had been his salvation. He walked to the window and looked out at the street. A man was walking his dog under the streetlight. The man paused, looking up at Marcus' window. He was far away, just a shape in a coat, but for a second, the street lamp caught his face. He looked pale. Mark flinched, stepping back into the shadows, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He rubbed the thick, keloid scar on his ruined arm. It was H.